Eu tenho aqui a mi lado, como todos conocéis, a Amanda Feilding, que vai ser a introdução do tema. Depois eu vou apresentar os ponentes e seguirei com a moderação.
Hello, and I want to say what a wonderful pleasure it is to be introducing 4 such pioneers in this incredibly important field of research into consciousness and its altered states, and in particular here the effects of ayahuasca. And I actually think that there is one of the most important things we can possibly do is to know more about our own consciousness and how we can moderate it and learn to use it to treat many illnesses and indeed have insights which are less likely to happen without it. And that's why, whatever it was, many, many years ago, I gave up being a painter and decided brain imaging was a more interesting artwork because you can actually use it to change society. And so I'm very honored now to be here, but I decided I was the wrong person to be here because for one thing I can't pronounce Draulio's name, and much more importantly, I don't know the research intimately, with the exception of Geordie, with whom I know the research better because we're starting a program with collaboration and research. So I felt I couldn't do justice to their work. So it's very lovely. Rafael's come in to speak Spanish and do a more in-depth interaction with their work. But these are people who've really been at the forefront of this research. And I do think it's a world changer. We've been in a very unfortunate stage for the last few hundred years by making taboo these incredibly sacred means of reaching a higher, different, deeper state of consciousness. So all of our work kind of interacts, and that's what's very interesting. I mean, I was very instrumental in setting up several research programs. One of the most successful that I've been involved in is our program at Imperial, which I started with David Nutt in 2007, and now Robin will be producing, talking about it, I think, on Saturday. But what is fascinating was our psilocybin study threw light on something which I was very interested in from the 60s, which is the ego's controlling influence, which is now called the default mode network. And it shows that the intensity of a psychedelic experience is tied up with the degree to which the blood supply is removed, not being directed to the default mode network, i.e. the censoring power of the ego is lessened or almost dissolved completely. So other states of consciousness can come to the fore. And I know Draulio has been doing some very fascinating work looking at the relationship of the turning off of the default mode network with the visual visions that were got in ayahuasca, and he, no doubt, will tell you about it. And each person has been filling in links, and they work together, so we can build a better picture of how these substances work, and then get an idea of how they help humanity and how we can use them to help treating addiction, depression, all these common complaints which actually modern medicine is not really reaching. So they have incredibly important implications for both the individual and society. So I think it's a fascinating field to develop. And I'd like to turn you over now to Rafael to introduce the different people.
Pasaré ahora a presentar al Dr. Draulio de Araujo. Draulio es doctor en física médica de la Universidad Federal de Rio Grande del Norte, en Brasil. Draulio ha estado como 10 años, ¿no? Draulio en la Universidad de São Paulo. Tiene una experiencia muy larga en varias técnicas de neuroimagen, desde electroencefalograma hasta análisis muy complejos de resonancia magnética funcional. Y Draulio y un equipo muy grande ahí en esta universidad están estudiando los efectos antidepresivos de la ayahuasca en una muestra muy grande de pacientes, que es la más grande hasta hoy que hay. Ha publicado un paper muy interesante con otras personas sobre las visiones de la ayahuasca utilizando técnicas de resonancia funcional, que seguramente va a hablar un poco de esto. Y es una persona que que es muy buena gente, que estamos empezando a trabajar juntos también. Y bueno, 20-25 minutos, Raúl.
Gracias, Rafael. Well, first I'd like to thank ICES. I'd like to thank Oscar, Ben, José Carlos, Jordi, Rafael, Bia for taking such a good care of me and of all of us. So thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a great honor to speak and side by side with people that have somehow managed to use their shoulders and to start not in the very beginning of the ayahuasca research. So everything that, or most of what I've learned from research in ayahuasca, I've learned from these groups, from the groups that are here represented by Jordi, by Rafael, by José Carlos. So it's indeed a great pleasure to be here. When I was thinking of what I was going to talk to you today, the first image that came to my mind was this one. So let me try explaining why this image was the first one that came to my mind when I was invited to talk in this such diverse audience. This guy here on the left is a brilliant neuroscientist called Francisco Varela. Francisco unfortunately left us in 2001, and at the middle of his career, he decided that it was a great chance to have neuroscience speaking with contemplative sciences, with Buddhist meditation. By then, this was 1987, they funded an institute that's called the Mind and Life Institute. And they have gathering every year. They have a very interesting institute. And the idea of the institute is to promote a conversation between scientists, experienced neuroscientists, and experienced Buddhist meditators. And I believe that this is the most important, on my point of view, as a scientist, as a neuroscientist, I believe that this is the most important thing that I will gather from this conversation here. We don't have, I believe we don't have a Francisco Varela here, and I believe we don't have Dalai Lama here. But we have a gathering of very good scientists with people that are really experienced in the ayahuasca experience. So this dialogue between science and the traditional experience, to me, is the most important thing that a scientist can try to do, is to confirm or to ask for the people that have experience with ayahuasca if what we are talking about makes sense. So, and that's basically my job in the next 20 minutes, is to tell you a story that we are trying to build. And at the end, I'm going to ask you if that makes sense. So part of the endeavor is to try to have you understanding the very difficult language that science sometimes poses. So to begin with, it's important to try understanding on the scientific perspective, what is ayahuasca? So science sometimes when we think of science, we think of something that's immutable, that's unchangeable, that dominates the truth, and that's not truth, of course. Science is a language, like any other language. It's a language that changes every once in a while. It's a language that we have to learn how to speak it, and we have to learn how to work on their rules. So it's a language that's based on a bunch of rules, and that a lot of times is very dry, it's very brutal in a sense. So it imposes things as truth, and I'm trying to work on a perspective that this is moving. So what I'm going to tell you is just a story. It's a story that that I enjoy a lot constructing it. I enjoy a lot thinking about it, and I want you to help me on the task to show me if the way we're going is more or less makes a little bit of sense at least. So the example I want to bring comes from one data that we, a finding that we have on what it is called the default mode network. This is what Amanda was mentioning, and that what Jordi was mentioning. What is the default mode network? So the default mode network is a brain network, so a series of brain sites, a series of brain regions that act together to achieve a certain function. Why is so interesting to understand the default network? Because, and why is it linked somehow to psychedelics? Because the default mode network is, in some sense, we can say that the default mode network is a sort of an interoception marker. So it's a marker on the movement of looking to the outside and changing the perspective to the inside. And the default mode network is a network that is apparently sensitive to this movement. So one study we did that started in 2006, we wanted to look at what happens to the default mode network when subjects, experienced individuals on the ayahuasca use, were doing an unspecific task and were inside a scanner. So we've measured their brain while they were under the effects of ayahuasca, and we found something that was very intriguing, very interesting. That is the fact that the ayahuasca changes the response on the default mode network. It disengages the default mode network. It diminishes the activity of the default mode network. So what does it, and what's interesting is that this was found before we found it. This was also found, and it was published by the collaboration between the Imperial College of London and the Beckley Foundation. They have this very interesting paper published, and the first author is Robin Carl Harris. And this very interesting paper, what they've shown was what we found later on, and that is that under the effect of a different psychedelic, in this case psilocybin, the default mode network activity is also reduced. The default mode network activity is also reduced in meditation. So here we have 3 examples of a reducing in the activity of the default mode network. 2 examples of related to psychedelics, and 1 example related to meditation. What is the interpretation or the most frequent interpretation to this kind of result? The default mode network have been linked to what is called mind wandering, the process of mind wandering. And what is it? What is the process of mind wandering? Is something that's very human, at least, and that is the fact that a lot of times we want to pay attention to something, and then all of a sudden we get abducted, we get kidnapped by our minds that take us someplace else. So a lot of you are mind wandering right now while I'm speaking. A lot of you are, some of you may want to pay attention to what I'm speaking. But then all of a sudden you realize that you're not here. All of a sudden you realize that you're someplace else, that you're thinking on something. This is what we call the mind wandering process. So we are constantly mind wandering. And there are some papers, there are some research showing that the activity of the default mode network relates to this process of mind wandering. Meaning that if I'm mind wandering, if I'm more engaged in this process, what happens is that you have an increased activity of the default mode network. If I'm less mind wandering, it means that my default mode network is, activity of the default mode network is decreased. So the question we raised was, what does it mean to have, with this perspective, with the perspective that the default mode network is somehow related to mind wandering, what does it mean to have a decreased DMN, default mode network activity, while you're under the effect of a psychedelic, or while you're under the effect, or while you're meditating? The first thing that, like the intuition that we have is, in fact, for ayahuasca at least, it seems as though that mind wander is even increased and not decreased. So then we have a result saying that we have a decrease in mind wandering. This decrease in mind wandering could be related to the amount of mind wandering, but then at the same time, when I realize that I'm under the effect of ayahuasca, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Does it make sense? Serious. To me, it doesn't make sense. Maybe for some of you, it makes sense. But to me, what happens is the opposite. To me, what happens is that in fact, you have an increase in mind wandering. Your mind is bouncing you in many places that is somehow related to mind wandering. So with this question in mind, we decided to go other way. We decided to look at a different system. We decided to look at what we called awareness. So the example I'm going to show you to give you the idea of which way we're going comes from meditation. There is this very interesting paper published 2 years ago by Wendy Hazenkamp, who is from the Mind and Life Institute, funded by Francisco Varela and the Dalai Lama, who showed the following. So this is a very important slide for you to understand, in order to understand my point. So what is the process of meditation, or the process of practicing meditation? So if we consider one example of meditation, for instance, the focused attention meditation, and that is, so you are asked, or you want to focus your attention on something, in one point, on a candle, in my breath, in something. So this is your practice. This is the practice of meditating, right? So what happens? This is where you want to be. And then, all of a sudden, your mind wanders. But you don't realize that it wanders. As this is one characteristic of the mind wandering. It goes unperceivable. So you don't realize that your mind have wandered. And then, all of a sudden, you're like, oops, I'm not paying attention to my breath or to the candle or whatever the focus of my attention should be. So what is my task? Gently, I'm going to go there and bring my mind back. This is my task, right? So I move the focus back to where I should be. So I have a process of shifting attention. So with this model, what is it that this models pretty much what meditation is about, a very simplistic way of what the practice of meditation should be about. So it's a sustained focus in something, and then all of a sudden you mind wander, and then you are aware of your mind wandering, you switch your attention back to where you should be, right? So this is a process. So what was it that Wendy and the group did? They had a functional MRI study in which they've asked experienced meditators to press a button whenever they found themselves mind-wandering. So whenever they are in this awareness part of the mind-wandering. All right? Why is it that you need experienced meditators? Because most of us who are not experienced meditators will have a difficult time or will take a little bit longer to detect the mind wandering, while experienced meditators will detect that faster than most of us will do. And they would detect that more frequently. So what was it that they found? That, curiously, when you look at periods when the individual are mind-wandering, so they are not aware that they are mind-wandering. They are just mind-wandering. How do you know it? It's a period before the awareness period. So right before the awareness period, what happens? You have an increased on the activity of the default mode network. And what happens during periods that you are aware of the mind wandering? You have a decrease in the activity of the default mode network, and you have an increase in the activity of this other network called the salience network. So, this model tells us that in fact, the default mode network is, or it seems to be, related to this process of mind wandering. But it occurs mostly during periods of mind wandering when you're not aware of your mind wandering. And that's most of the time. Most of the time, your mind is taking you all over the place, and we are not aware of it. And then all of a sudden, we are aware of that movement, and when we are aware of that movement, what happens is that you engaged a different network called the salience network. So what was the next step that we decided to do? Well, if this is true, then if this is the case for ayahuasca, then what we would see is a decrease in the activity of the default mode network, as we did see. But then we would see an increase in the activity of the salience network. And in fact, that's what we've seen. So, where is it that we are right now? We are in a place that we believe that what is changed during the effects of ayahuasca in relation to this mind-wandering process is that you are more aware of your mind wandering. And not that you have a reduced mind wandering, but you're more aware of what's going on. What's going on in your mind wandering? What's going on inside of you? And to me, what's interesting is the fact that, and this is where we want to go right now, is okay, so what is it that catches your attention? What is it that brings the mind wandering to a level that you are more aware of it? So what we believe that's behind it is, and this is what we are looking for right now, is that the visual system is part, or does part of the job of giving you the awareness of your mind wandering. So it may be, and this is what we have been thinking and what we have been looking for, it may be that what happens, or part of your experience with ayahuasca, is that it gives light to your mind wandering, to your own memories, to whatever the mind wandering is. So we as humans, we're visual. We're visual. We believe in what we see most of the time. But if you're walking on a forest and you hear something, the first thing you're going to do is to look at it. You're not going to trust your ears. You're going to trust your eyes. So this may be an interesting mechanism to which you are aware of something, that you believe on something, that you see things that are inside of your own mind wandering, giving light to it. And what is the system that gives light to it? The visual system. And why is it that we believe that the visual system is behind it? It's because of this paper that Rafael mentioned that we published 2 years ago. On these same individuals, we did another task, and that was to try understanding what happens to our visual system while we are under the effect of ayahuasca. And what happens is when I ask you to imagine something, when you are inside the scanner, what happens is that during the effects of ayahuasca, you have an important engagement or a recruitment of your visual system, of a great part of your visual system, and of a great part of your memory system. So it might make sense. It might make sense. And this is what we are pursuing right now, is trying to link what's behind the activity of the default mode network and this mind-wandering process with our visual system, and trying to elucidate if maybe part of the experience with ayahuasca comes from the fact that you have a coupled engagement between the default mode network and our visual system. So these are some of the take-home messages, and you know, this is what I personally want to hear from you, or from part of you that have a lot of experience with ayahuasca. If that makes sense, if that is a good strategy, if that is something that we should pursue. So having an input from a lot of Dalai Lamas that are here, we hope to start this conversation in both ways, meaning that it's not only most of the times when we say that we are doing science on psychedelics, or when we are doing science on ayahuasca, for instance, a lot of people think that this goes only one way. One way meaning that, well, this is nice because now I'm going to understand what is what ayahuasca does to my brain. And that's not the point. To me, that's not the point. I mean, this is just a language. This, what I'm showing here, this is not ayahuasca. This is a language. This is a representation of something. So this does not translate as this is something. And when I put this together with the name science, then it's proven scientifically. What does it mean? What does it mean that something is proved scientifically? It means that it's going to change. In a couple of years, that's going to change. Our perception of this language that changes all the time is going to change. People changed the perspective of very brilliant scientists like Newton. He was a genius. And his perspective was changed. The language that he used was changed. So the reason I'm telling you that is that I don't believe that this is a one-way. This is not science contributing to the understanding of what the ayahuasca effect is. You know what the ayahuasca effect is, more than science does. Tradition knows more than science does. It goes both ways. It goes both ways because I believe, as Francisco believed, that by doing science this way, maybe we can do a better science. We can do a science with ethics. That's something that maybe science is needing in the last couple of years. We could do science with more humanity. And this is what I believe, that the dialogue that was first thought by Francisco and by the Dalai Lama, it may as well be here. It may as well be in the science of psychedelics and the science of ayahuasca. So with this, I want to thank a lot of people that have been involved in this research. The group is growing. So these are the people that were involved directly on the data that I've presented. But there are other people that are involved in the group right now doing the experiments that we are conducting in the present moment. So with this, I'd like to thank the people that I'm representing here and to thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Gracias, Draulio. Una pregunta a ti y a Jordi también, que son las personas que tienen más experiencia con técnicas de neuroimagen, mucho más que yo seguramente. Quería saber si podéis comentar un poco que utilizando diferentes técnicas como el PET o el SPECT o la resonancia magnética funcional y al mismo tiempo con sustancias similares como la psilocibina, la ayahuasca y una sustancia un poco más de la ketamina, se han encontrado a veces activaciones y a veces desactivaciones de distintas áreas del cerebro, ¿no? A veces con la misma sustancia, pero a veces con una forma de administración distinta, la psilocibina intravenosa, lo que ha hecho Carl Harris, y la ayahuasca oral que han hecho vosotros. Entonces no sé si podrían comentar un poco de esta diferencia, de por qué algunos estudios muestran estimulación mientras otros muestran una desestimulación de distintas áreas del cerebro.
Well, from my perspective, Rafa, is that this is a technique that's it's very subtle in the sense that you have a it's not very specific. This is the best we have. The best we have to investigate the human brain non-invasively are these techniques that you've mentioned, MRI, EEG, MEG, and so on. But all of these, are very unspecific. And that means that the type of data you have, you need to reproduce it so that it's very sensitive to many variables, as it's not that sensitive. So I believe this is why you have sometimes contradictory results in the literature.
I think it's a question of the technique you are using, not the route by which you are administering the drug. This would be like the metaphor I was showing earlier of the elephant and the blindfolded people, so that depending on the technique you are using, you may see different things. So the initial studies using PET and assessing the effects of psilocybin, what they showed were increases in blood flow in frontal regions. This is what we replicated later using SPECT and ayahuasca. But when we analyzed brain oscillations, we saw decreases in energy content in posterior brain regions. This was later replicated by Robin using MEG and psilocybin, and now Draulio using fMRI has replicated Robin's findings on the default mode network. Robin used psilocybin and Draulio has administered ayahuasca. So I think it's more a question of the technique we are using to measure effects rather than the administration route we choose to give the drug we are studying.
Independent of the drug, is more about the technique.
This is my view of this paradox.
Thank you. Pues voy a presentar al doctor Paulo Barbosa. El doctor Paulo, también yo le conozco hace bastante tiempo, el doctor en ciencias médicas. En el 2005 ha publicado un artículo muy interesante sobre las personas que iban la primera vez a tomar ayahuasca, o sea que nunca habían tomado antes, y iban a un ritual y les evaluaba también algunos días después, y algunos años después ha publicado un otro paper con un seguimiento de 6 meses de esas personas, y ha encontrado que además de sentirse bien, había una reducción de síntomas psiquiátricos menores porque eran personas sanas. Y después Paulo ha ido a hacer su postdoctorado en New México, Nuevo México, con Rick Strassman y Michael Boyer-Rutz, donde están evaluando calidad de vida, funciones cognitivas y también técnicas de neuroimagen de los miembros de la Unión do Vegetal, que es una religión ayahuasquera para aquellos que no saben. Y yo quería llamar la atención para esto, que es muy interesante, que es el primer estudio de esta naturaleza con las personas de la Unión do Vegetal. Los estudios de Jordi desde el 99, además de reclutar voluntarios sanos que no son de las religiones, siempre ha tenido mucho contacto con las personas del Santo Daime. Y Paulo está haciendo este estudio con los de la Unión Vegetal, lo que me parece algo muy novedoso. Y vas a hablar un poco de esto para nosotros en 20-25 minutos. Vale, gracias.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you, the organization, for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And also to the people who came to see us. I'm very pleased by that. What I'm going to talk about today is part of my postdoc research. We did neuropsychological and psychological evaluation with UDV people who lives in Santa Fe, and compare them with a control group who comes from communities, Catholic and Protestant communities in Albuquerque. So everything was done in New Mexico State. Santa Fe and Albuquerque are separated by about 100 kilometers, and we evaluate everybody in New Mexico during the years of 2011-2012. This is a result of a collaboration between 4 institutions. CAPES is the federal organization in Brazil that funded me while I was in New Mexico during these 2 years. And UNM is the university where the study took place. PROAD is the place where the analysis is taking place right now, is from Unifesp, Universidade Federal de São Paulo. And UESC is my university in Bahia, in Ilhéus State. So it's a collaboration between these 4 institutions. This is the general design of this study. Basically, we evaluate the subjects in the day before and the day after the ayahuasca session. So just to let you know, ayahuasca is the name of ayahuasca in Unión Vegetal. So when we refer to ayahuasca in UDV, we name it ayahuasca. So basically, we evaluate people, the subjects, in the day before, in the day after the session. So during the day before and the next day of the session. And the controls were also evaluated during 2 days at the same time, more or less the same time of the subjects, to control for the learning effects on their neuropsychological instruments. Today, we evaluate baseline status of mental health and neuropsychological status, and the short-term change in cognitive performance and sleep. Today, we are going to see only the baseline state, the day 1 evaluation, and because the short-term effects, short-term change are still under analysis, and very briefly, very shortly, we are going to present them to you too. So we are going to show you the results on religiosity, alcohol and drug use, impulsivity, quality of life, personality, mood, and neuropsychological function, including attention, executive functions, and memory. Basically, this was roughly the inclusion criteria for the two groups. The ayahuasca group, the UDV group, had to be an active member of UDV and had to drink the vegetal, the ayahuasca, on a regular basis, meaning at least two times a month. And the control group, they also had to be active members of Catholic and Protestant communities. For the ayahuasca group, we asked them not to drink the vegetal during the 6 days before previously the baseline evaluation, and the control group, they were excluded if they had at least one experience of ayahuasca. So they had to have no exposure to ayahuasca at all. And also for the control group, they had to be matched by age, gender, and other social demographic profile variables to AYA2014 participant. For both groups, we asked them not to drink caffeine, tobacco, or any stimulant less than an hour before the evaluation. And also we asked them not to use alcohol in the day or the previous day the evaluation. This is going to be the results. This is just to show you some of the socio-demographic profiles. The groups were very well matched. The median is a cut that divides the sample between the upper level, so half of the people from UDV and from the controls were above 43 years old, and half were below 43 years old. On educational level, the groups were also very closed. The control group had 18 years of formal education, and UDV group had 16 years of formal education. We also collect several data on the attendance to ayahuasca sessions, to the ceremonies of UDV, and also collect data on the attendance to masses or services in Protestant and Catholic churches. So this is the data on the number of sessions attended during the previous 12 months. So median of 30 sessions for UDV group and 45 sessions for the control groups. This is understandable because Catholics and Catholic and Protestant church, they used to have more, their service and masses used to be more frequent than the UDV sessions. Also, this is also some variables on the attendance to ayahuasca sessions. We ask UDV subjects to estimate how many times they attend to ayahuasca session during their lifetime. Median of 195, minimum of 20 times, and maximum is an estimation of 1,000 times. And we also ask them when they start drinking the vegetal on a regular basis, meaning at least twice a month. This is the number of months. The total number of months that they were drinking ayahuasca on a regular basis, median of 60 months, minimum 12 months, and a maximum of 192 months of drinking the vegetal on a regular basis. Here we start looking at the variables, the dependent variables evaluated. This is the religiosity measured by the Duke University Religious Index. It measures three domains of religiosity. The first of all is organizational religious activity, which means public religious activity, such as attending to meetings, public meetings, or attending services or masses. The second domain is non-organizational religiosity. It is a private religious activity such as prayer or watching a religious show on TV. And the most important of all for our purpose was the intrinsic religiosity, which is the feeling, the presence of God, and a personal commitment to apply religious principles in daily life. So in the organizational religiosity, the UDV score lower than the controls, so they had less organizational religious activity, which, as I said before, it's perfectly understandable because the public activities of Protestant Catholics are more frequent than the UDV activities. However, in the intrinsic religiosity, UDV scored greater than the controls. So according to this instrument here, they had greater score on a domain concerning the feeling of the presence of God and commitment to apply religious principle in daily life. We also administered some instruments on alcohol and drug use. This is a partial results of that. These results were collected by using the Addiction Severity Index, and it evaluates the recent and past use of alcohol and other substances. Past use is a lifetime use. Here in this chart, we show people who used, how many people who used the substance on a regular basis for at least 1 year. By regular basis, we meant 2 times a week. So an alcohol during the lifetime, past use of alcohol, we have 22 people who use alcohol regularly during at least 1 year, against 17 people of the control group. And alcohol to intoxication, to get drunk during lifetime, we have 17 people from UDV and who used alcohol to, who made use of, had used alcohol during lifetime, 17 people from UDV, and against 7 people from the control group. Cannabis lifetime past use of cannabis, we had 21 people from UDV who had who used cannabis on a regular basis in the past, and against 7 people from the control group who used cannabis on a regular basis on lifetime. The recent use, however, is it's different. Alcohol, we mean here, the recent use of alcohol a month, we mean people who use alcohol at least 1 day during the previous 30 days. So it is inverse. Only 2 people of UDV use alcohol in the previous 30 days, against 19 people from the control group. And alcohol to intoxication, only 1 people of UDV made use of this kind of use of alcohol into intoxication against 4 people of the control group. We also measured impulsivity by using this instrument, the Barat Impulsivity Scale. Basically, it measures 3 domains of impulsivity. Attentional, it's a tendency to make quick decisions. Motor is a tendency to act without thinking, and non-planning is a lack of forethought. The impulsivity global is the sum of the scores of the 3 previous domains. So there are no significant difference in the 3 domains. However, in the sum, the impulsivity global, the UDV sample scored lower than the controls, which means that in this case it's good because it seems that according to the instrument, they were less impulsive. We also administered the quality of life, the short form, 36 items, which measures 8 domains of psychological and physical well-being, physical functioning, role limitations due to physical health, role limitations due to emotional problems, energy fatigue, emotional well-being, social functioning, pain, and general health. And there were no difference between the 2 groups except for this one here, role limitation due to physical health, which means how much the daily life is how much the daily life is hampered by due to physical problems. So the UDV scored greater in this domain, which means they were better. So in this domain, they were better than the controls. We also evaluated personality traits by using the Big Five inventory, which measures 5 domains of personality. Extroversion is the tendency to be outgoing, energetic, is a continuum, how much a person has a tendency to be outgoing and energetic. Agreeableness is a tendency to be compassionate and comparative. Consciousness is a tendency to show self-discipline and act dutifully. And neuroticism is a tendency to experience unpleasant emotions such as anger and anxiety. And openness is a tendency to be inventive and appreciate art and unusual ideas. This was the most interesting instrument, I think, because we detected 3 differences here. UDV scored greater in the agreeableness, which means they were more agreeable, they had more agreeableness than the control group. They also score greater in the consciousness, which means that they tend to be more self-disciplined than the control group, according to this instrument. And also score greater in the openness, which means, according to this instrument, they had a more tendency to be inventive and appreciate art and unusual ideas. Also, we evaluate the mood. 6 domains of the mood, that is measured by the mood profile states. Depression, anger, vigor, tension, fatigue, and confusion. And the UDV score lower in the confusion domains, though they are less confused according to this instrument. Lower means better in this case. Finally, I'm going to show you some of the neuropsychological tests we used. The first one was the trail-making test. It's considered a measure of attention and executive function. It measures scanning, sequencing, switching flexibility. And it has 2 trials. The first trial, the subject is asked to connect numbers in ascending order from 1 to 25. It's this one here. 1 to 25. And part B, it's a little bit more complicated because it has to alternate numbers and letters in ascending and alphabetical order. So 1 to A, A to 2, 2 to B, and so on. The score is based on the time to complete the test in seconds, and there were no difference between the groups in this task. We also use the Stroop test. It's a measure of executive function, and it evaluates inhibition of habitual response, cognitive flexibility, and selective attention. The Stroop has 3 trials. The first trial, the subject has to read 100 words against a card, a white card, red, green, blue, and so on. And the score is based on how many words he can read within 45 seconds. The trial 2, the subject has to name the color of that X. It also has 100 of these X, and he had to name the color, like green, blue, and red. The trial 3 is the most important one because here is where we can see the cognitive flexibility and the inhibition of habitual response. So the subject has to inhibit the tendency, the habitual response of reading the words and tell us the color instead. So he has to say green, blue, and red instead of read, red, green, blue. And also in this test, there are no difference between the 2 groups. The California Verbal Learning Test is a memory test. It's a very complex test that involves several trials. But basically, it is made of 2 lists. List A is made of 16 shopping item lists from 4 semantic categories: fruits, spices and herbs, tools, and clothing. And the list B is interference list, which has also 16 shopping items from the same or similar categories: foods, spices and herbs, fish, and utensils. The score is based on how many words the subject can repeat after we say them. So we say the words out loud and ask them to repeat the words. So there's several scores that we can extract from this instrument, but basically we can say that measures learning, measures the interference effect on memory and learning, and measures short delay recall, measures long delay recall, recognition, intrusions. There are no difference between the groups across most of these domains, except for the fact that UDV did better in the interference list, they could remember more words than the controls in the interference list. Finally, this is one of the tests we also use, is the Rios-Tehif complex figure test. It's a measure of visual spatial constructional ability, visual memory and planning. So there are 3 trials. In the first trial, we asked the subject to reproduce this drawing, this complex drawing. And in the second trial, he has to reproduce immediately after the copy, but without the copy in front of him, so he has to reproduce the drawing with memory. And the later call, about 35 minutes or 40 minutes after the copy, he has to remember and reproduce as much as he can this drawing from his memory. The score is based on accuracy from 0 to 36 points, and there are no differences between the groups in this test either. So this is the summary of the major findings. UDV had a greater lifetime use of alcohol, but a lower recent use of alcohol when compared to the controls. Greater lifetime use of cannabis and greater intrinsic religiosity. Also, UDV had greater scores on personality traits regarding prosocial, self-discipline, and aesthetic sensitive attitudes. UDV had lower score on the confusion subscale of mood scale. Also, UDV had lower score on the global score of impulsiveness scale, and there were no difference between the groups in the neuropsychological assessment, but for at least 2 of the California Verbal Learning Test. This was a very complex study, and we are still doing analysis. I present to you today only the preliminary analysis. We have a lot of work ahead, like compare the results with normative data, relate the results with the exposure to ayahuasca, and analysis the pre-post ayahuasca session on the change in neuropsychological data pre-post ayahuasca session. And I'm very grateful for the UDV people who allow us to do this research, and to my colleagues at UNM, Michael Buchschuss, Rick Strassman, Jessica Pomi, and there are many people who contribute to the collection and analysis of the data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. José Maria Fábregas, José Carlos Bolso, both have said something that to me is very interesting, that these samples of users are self-selected. As they said, they are people that adapted better. And I would like to ask you, and then extend the question to the other opponents, if you observed in all these years adverse reactions, and if you observe serious adverse reactions like psychotic breaks, and when I mean extend to the others, I mean Jordi and Draulio, is that if these neuroimage findings, besides corroborating possible therapeutic effects, could also shed light in some psychopathological effects. And extended in this team of psychopathology to José Carlos Bolso, if he believes that there could be some questionnaires that could be used to trial the possible volunteers in participating in ayahuasca rituals that could reduce the possibility of serious adverse reactions.
Well, the first part of our question, yes, absolutely. We discussed this in a review we did in 2012. When you do retrospective study, like case control or cross-sectional study, of course, the sample you're evaluating, as they are regular users of ayahuasca or ayahuasca, they had good experience with the tea, with the ayahuasca, because I believe, well, this is a logical thinking, if a person have an adverse reaction, this adverse reaction will occur in the first phase of ayahuasca drink, like in the first month or first year or so. So these retrospective studies tend to miss this kind of subjects. I try to overcome this problem in my master's when I evaluate people before their very first ayahuasca experience, but it was too hard because very few people volunteer to participate in the study before the ayahuasca. They are afraid, and it's require lots of logistics. It's very, very, very hard. I'm proposing a study to overcome this bias in the general studies of ayahuasca, trying to evaluate only people who experience adverse effects, people who are dropout, when I'm having some difficulties finding partnerships. And of course, people are afraid of doing that, because the results can be distorted by some authorities, and this can be used as argument to forbid or to making law issues, etc., right? I don't, can you repeat the second part of your question?
Then I asked to extend for the Jordi and Draulio if they believe that the neuroscientific findings in the brain, besides explaining therapeutic effects, could also explain psychopathological effects. And then if there, like I can extend this question to you, not only to José Carlos Bolso, if there are good ways that could these possible adverse reactions could be reduced overall, and a questionnaire, an interview, or something that could reduce the participation of people prone to adverse reactions.
Well, I believe so, right? So if a person...
Sorry, just I just want to say that one, and if you say that some drug have an adverse reaction, if people want to forbid them, I don't think that's the reason not to tell that this drug has an adverse reaction, because this, I don't, like, you have to say it.
No, I'm telling you what people are saying me when they refuse, when they are resistant to do this kind of research. Okay?
So yeah, I believe we have examples that the understanding through neuroimaging will have an impact on the understanding of some mental conditions. And I believe that the greatest example is the fact that, for instance, if you look at the default network in depressed patients, they have an increased activity of the default network. And that has been interpreted as a marker of a typical condition on depressive patients, that is the rumination, in a sense that thoughts keep circling, and this might be the reason why you have an increased activity on the default mode network. So in some sense, there are parallels that you can have it right now to between mental states and the use of psychedelics.
Sí, hay algunos instrumentos que pueden servir para predecir si una persona puede tener a lo largo de su vida un brote psicótico. Hay una serie de factores de riesgo que se pueden tratar de controlar, ¿no? en entrevistas psiquiátricas y por medio de cuestionarios. Las enfermedades mentales tampoco son una cuestión de sí o no, sino que se organizan en forma de espectro, en el que todos nos situamos en algún punto de este espectro. Entonces, en el caso concreto de la psicosis, y se sabe que ha habido casos de brotes psicóticos después de tomar ayahuasca, hay una serie de preguntas que se pueden hacer en este espectro que se llaman experiencias inusuales, ¿no? Personas que, sin tener ningún diagnóstico y estando igual de sanas que el resto de los sanos, se sitúan en este espectro en un punto más cercano a lo que podría ser, pues, una enfermedad mental concreta, y son, digamos, los que tienen más probabilidades de, si se someten a una experiencia estresante, como puede ser la experiencia con ayahuasca, puede ser gratificante pero también estresante, y la esquizofrenia es una relación entre la vulnerabilidad y el estrés, pues puede coadyuvar a que se produzca desencadenante. Y hay formas de poder tal, pero tampoco se han hecho estudios en los que se haya visto si controlando determinadas pues, dimensiones o determinadas variables, pues puedes reducir o no reducir. Serían estudios interesantes que quedan por hacer.
Pues me gustaría agradecer a vosotros y decir que aunque esta mesa no ha tenido oportunidad de preguntas del público, los ponentes estarán en el coffee break y podéis hacer preguntas a ellos. Y solo para terminar, me han pedido para anunciar que el Journal of Transpersonal Research está abriendo un special topic issue de psychedelic research. There's a call for papers y los artículos pueden ser enviados, los abstracts, hasta el 31 de diciembre de este año y ya hay la previsión de publicarlo en la edición de mayo-junio de 2015. Entonces, quien tenga interés en publicar estudios sobre sustancias psicodélicas, hay esta oportunidad. Pues muchas gracias.